For decades, the newspaper has been our companion for news and special events. But here in almost 2020, the newspaper struggles to stay alive. I had the honor and pleasure of sitting down with my good friend, Pat Cavanaugh, a newspaper man through and through. He's wore every hat imaginable in the newspaper business over the decades he has been involved. He's wore the title of publisher, editor, reporter, and many others. He even started out as a young boy delivering newspapers. Today we talked to Pat Cavanaugh about the newspaper business.
Actually, I was 13, and I grew up in Maryland. I lived out in the country outside of Annapolis, and I took over a paper route, and back then they used kids. They were called little merchants, and now they're all adult, of course. And it was a community. It was probably about a 3-mile trek around the community serving papers. I think I had about 125 papers, 130 papers. And, I didn't mind serving the papers. The collections were the problem. And, I'd go out, on Saturday and spend most of my Saturday trying to collect, and people wouldn't be home, or whatever, and I had to come back and whatever. And I would deliver papers for like a year and half never collected. So my bill actually raised up pretty high. So the circulation manager contacted my mother finally, and my mother and my aunt, who lived down there in Edgewater, where I grew up, got quite alarmed. They thought maybe I might be stealing the money and going to jail. Now, we lived down a dirt road 1.5 miles. I went to private school, and, I never saw anybody. There was no other kids down there, so I don't know where I would have spent the money, but they thought I did. So the old circulation manager came down, talked to him. He said, well, we'll put him to work and we'll pay this off. Well, they put me to work when I was 14 in the mailroom. And we went out and collected the route. Well, it turned out that all the money was out on the route. I actually got a profit from that route finally. And I just stayed at the paper and, worked my way up. And when I was 16, I was the home delivery supervisor of 11,000 daily newspaper, in charge of about 150 carriers. And going to school full-time, of course, high school. So that's basically where I started.
And you see the shape that media is in now, and sometimes on social media you call out some of these media outlets. As the president has coined the phrase fake news in reference to CNN on some of the stuff that he says has been inappropriate. What do you think about media today and how it's changed since you started?
Well, of course, when I started, Daryl, I'm 72 now, so I was back in the early 60s, and I was fortunate to work in the heyday of newspapers. The television media and cable media, is what people watch now. They don't read newspapers. And back in those days, the television stations had some pretty boys that did the news, and they usually took the news from the newspaper, and that's what they did. And they don't do too much more than that now, and except there's no newspapers really to make the news up, so they're kind of out on their own. They're not trained. They're actors more than anything else, and as a result, we get what we get. And it's really a shame because, in the media, I think the media as the fourth estate was the protector, and when it's right, is the protector and keeps things in balance. And in the estate system, there being 4 estates, if you believe that philosophy of the world, and that's the church, the people, the government, and the newspapers, the newspaper being the fourth estate, all have to balance each other. Well, that's not happening now because the newspaper is with the politicians, the media, and not necessarily the newspaper. And as a result, we're out of balance on the estate system, and that's why we're in problems we have right now. Eventually, people are going to rise up, and that's what ends up happening. It happened during the Reformation. In the church, the church got overpowered, and finally people had to rise up and shut it down. Same thing's going to end up happening, and that's going to be really sad. So I think that, and I saw this happening. Molly and I owned a paper in California. We bought it in '98 out in Orange County, which was then, I don't think it is even anymore, one of the last conservative bastions in California. And when we bought that paper, I found myself in competition to get reporters from the Orange County Register, which was about a 200,000 size newspaper. And it didn't used to be that way, because you didn't work at a big newspaper unless you started a smaller newspaper and you learned the ropes for 2 years or so, like going to the minors in baseball. And what happened is they would hire these kids, then they'd put them out in their little communities where they started all these little community newspapers. And then they might do one story a month. If they did that, and well, it burnt, they didn't care anymore, because that's not what they got in newspapers. So we lost a good collection of potential future writers, and now we get what we get, and I blame journalism schools for what we get, and the teachers mostly have had no experience on any type of media, but they teach journalism, and they teach journalism in this idealistic way, and that's okay. It's okay to be idealistic as a journalist, but you also have to be practical and understand that you're not the center of attention. What you are is the scribe, and to report both sides. And in any business, there should be a higher up hierarchy, like an editor or a publisher or whatever, that make the decisions editorially, and they should all be kept on an editorial page. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. It's spread in their stories, and it's a shame.
Do you think the media is all liberal?
Well, the media's always been liberal, okay? I mean, there's very few. I think many of your community newspaper, which I was involved with all my life, depending on the philosophies of the publisher or the owner of the newspapers, were conservative to a degree, but not ultra-conservative, not right-wing. There's not too many right-wing newspapers, and there wasn't. But I think newspapers have always been kind of liberal, because that's just and being liberal has changed, because I can remember when I was growing up, everybody was a Democrat, but it wasn't the Democrat of today. It was the old Southern Democrat, or it was a Democrat that was more conservative. And like Winston Churchill said, I don't know the exact quote, but basically said, if you're not a liberal when you're young and you haven't had more conservative ideas when you get older, you're not much of a human being. And that's not quite exactly what he said, but that's pretty much what he said. And I think that was the whole philosophy. I know that, I had an opportunity to do numerous papers across the country, and every one of them, I think we were liberal on dealing with our community as far as, socially. On supporting the YMCA's and the Boys Club and all the different types of groups that we supported. But I think we were more conservative on our editorial policies on how to spend money in these communities, how the communities were run, et cetera, And I always thought newspapers were alive, and I think they have a heart. And I think if you're the person that runs that newspaper and you have that opportunity, that all you are and ever will be is like a shepherd. You're not the owner of that newspaper. I don't care whether it's your money in it or somebody else pays you to run it. You're the shepherd. And you just like if you're the shepherd of sheep, you either have a good herd or you have a bad herd, and you're either a bad shepherd or a good shepherd. And that's how you have to look at these newspapers. And I always tried to look at a newspaper that way, that I didn't own that newspaper, that I was just there to try to manage it and do good for the community. And I always tried my best that way, and I always tried to have people that tried their best to be that way too. And I think that's all changed now. Like I said, it's called survival. And I never thought, on community newspapering, I never thought that those would be the first papers to go. I always thought the larger papers would, and that the smaller communities wouldn't go. But what's happening in these smaller communities is like what happens in Covington, what happens in Rockdale is we have like 110,000 people in, let's say, in Newton County, roughly. Well, half of those people live up in I think in the western part, up around Bridge Road, all the way up through there. Well, those people never acclimated themselves in Newton County. They still go to DeKalb, they still go to Atlanta. And so Newton County, say, for instance, is separated by half of the people that don't even care about being here. It's just a house. The other half are older people. The other 50,000 are older people that are like myself, that are, finally heading out to pasture, and the younger people don't have time. I mean, you have, 70,000 people a day drive out of this community to go work someplace else? I mean, do you have time to read a newspaper? I don't think so. Do you have time to really care about what happens in your community? And that's a shame. Because when a local community dies, when a local paper dies, there's no more checks and balances in a community. And when that happens, then, that's when taxes go up to here. That's when other things happen that you don't know about until you read about them, until you see them on something like that, what you do, with the folks you do for. I think they try their best to report the news all the time. But, you still need people. And you still have to be able to pay those people to go to cover these meetings, and as boring as they are a lot of times. So that's what's happening in newspapers. And newspapers brought this on themselves. Back in the 80s when I first became a publisher, I was a circulation manager, early 80s. I'd go to meetings and companies, and newspapers, again, were in their heyday then. Papers did 40, 50, 60% cash flows. And, I didn't find out till later that we had salesmen we paid good money to. They never sold. Because people would come in the front door, and we had rules. And, if you didn't have your ad in here by 2 o'clock on a Wednesday, it wasn't going to go in Thursday's paper. I don't care if you came in and said, I have 5 full pages, say, tough luck. We used to be able to do that. But I can remember going to meetings and see groups like Penny's and Sears back in their heyday. And they would come and talk to the publishers, and they say, please, we like newspapers. But you guys have got to give us a break, because every year we would raise our rates. And we get higher and higher and higher. So you guys got to give us a break, or we're going to have to find another alternate way. Well, we just laughed. It's like, yeah, so what else are you going to find? Well, guess what came along? Advo. And Advo took over the mail. And where we used to, when the people switched to preprints, said, we're running preprints now. And, we need a break on them. And said, no, we're going to charge you like $600, $1,000 to print those, to put those in our paper. Because we didn't want to lose the ROP or the ads. And, that's when Advo came along. Well, I think newspapers are lucky to get $15 $1,000 now, or $20 $1,000 for those inserts. And that was beginning of the end of newspapers, I think, then. I don't think we quite realized it. But when they started going, I remember I was publishing papers in San Diego, and we had every grocery store. I think they were worth about $1 million a year in all the advertising they did. I woke up one day and they were all gone. We lost $1 million out of a group of papers that I was running out of there, because they all went to Advo. They just pulled out of the newspaper. As a result, you don't see grocery ads too much. Food Depot, I think, does locally, and some other stuff, but that's it. So anyhow, the industry shot itself in the foot and kept shooting itself in the foot, and didn't realize until it was too late that they had done that, and we did. And then, of course, social media came along, and we were slow to react to that too. I mean, it was like, what is this? This is not going to come down in these local communities. Well, it did, and it has. As a result, there's newspapers that are gone, and they're not going to come back.
Of all the years you've been in the media business, have you seen the country so divided with the president as they are today?
No, I never saw much hatred. I mean, it started a little bit under Clinton, I think. In fact, I was personally a Democrat. I was out in California. There was a place called Paso Robles, and one day I just couldn't take it anymore. I went down and became a Republican. I can see the little old lady now. I came in, she was all older lady. She was all dressed in her red, white, and blue. And I went in and I said, look, I know old Franklin Roosevelt's crying today, but I'm becoming a Republican. And I just couldn't do it. And it started then, and then it's continued, and it's gotten worse. And you know what's going to happen, even if Trump doesn't win in 2020, I think he will, but if he doesn't, do you think this is going to stop? No, I mean, payback is you know what payback is called. And, I think there's going to be a payback from the Republicans to Democrats, and we're going to continue this cycle. And I think the only way it's going to ever stop is we have some really big major tragedy. And that's going to cause people to finally stop and pause. But, we have these groups. I was reading the headline or I saw it someplace, that the Democrats on this last, trip home, where they've had this big recess, when they had their town hall meetings, that the people all wanted Trump impeached. Well, I bet you if they really looked at who those people were, they're part of that far left groups that have infiltrated all these things, and where they raise Cain, and they listen to them, and they're the minority. So what's happened in this country is the minority controls things. Majority doesn't control things anymore. The minority, and then sometimes the minority of the minority control things, depending on what's going on. So, that's what's happened to us, and is that going to change? I don't think so, Daryl. Not in my lifetime. Maybe not in yours, but maybe in the younger people it will. I don't see it. It sounds bad, doesn't it? Depressing, but it's just going to get worse, I think.
What do you think the future is for hometown newspapers?
I think it depends on the culture and how far you are out from where a social media center, like Atlanta's kind of a social media center. When you say this business better than I did, and you always did when you worked for me. I thought we were far enough away here in Covington from that when I looked at things before I came out here, but even though we're an extreme and the Atlanta publications don't really cover us and they don't do that, it's still close enough. You go across a little bit further down into Walton County. Walton County is not affected as much, and I bet you if you did a study, there's not as much social media usage as it is, say, here and up further. Same thing in Greene County. So those papers are still fairly strong. And the people still have a belief in their local newspaper. As long as that happens, they're going to be around. But when that starts changing and people are going to start flowing from here. They've escaped from DeKalb. They went to Newton. I mean, that's just, let's face it. They're going to be going from Newton up to Walton. And when that happens, just like they'll just take a look in California where people are pouring out of California. They're going to Arizona, they're going to Washington, they're going to Oregon, they're going to Idaho. And these were all conservative states. They're all now becoming liberal states because you would think that they moved from someplace to get away from that mess. But they bring it with them. And that's what's going to end up happening. So, I think eventually there's not going to be a community newspaper. No, I don't think so. And I think the only salvation is going to be things like what you do, and who you work for now and covering the news. But and better than I, because I don't keep up like I used to. But when we had the Covington and Rockdale papers, when you and I worked together, we really got into online. And we covered online like a newspaper. And we went after, of course, we had the people. And we tried to monetize it, and we just couldn't. But because everything else was free. So, but we went after everything. You know how it was. If there was an accident, we wanted it right then. If it was a town hall meeting, I mean, you covered the county. We blasted out the county commissioners meeting to the whole county live. I mean, that stuff's not done anymore, but we did it. And, and it still couldn't monetize it. And like I said, I think we did a hell of a job, and like I said, it was like you could pick up the Covington News, cubnews.com, or rockdalenews.com, and you could see stuff happening immediately. And that's how we dealt with it, if you remember. And, it wasn't easy, because we had to get it up online. We had to do this. But I think we took pride. But that doesn't exist anymore either. They're just about dead. And I don't know how it is in Walton County and how your company is that you're doing things for, how strong it is. And I hope they're successful, because we're going to need it. We're just going to need it. Because the paper over there, I don't know too much about the Walton Tribune, except, I was always jealous because they had community support, and we didn't here in Newton County. But, I don't know how much longer that'll be around. I hope a long time, but I think eventually it's not going to be there.
What do you think some of these newspapers may be holding on by their skin of their teeth by being the legal guardian?
That's a key. Our salvation when the bottom fell out here in Newton County, and I was telling you that when I came here, we had a real estate magazine. That's when real estate, you had to give up your firstborn child just to have an opportunity to bid on a house. When that fell out, we had, I think I'd only been here 3 months, we had like a magazine for real estate. It was like $50,000 a month product. In 3 months' time, it was gone. So there it is, and it's just, I don't know. It makes me sick in my stomach because I love newspapers. That was my whole life. I miss it some today, but and I write once in a while, but my heart's not in it anymore. I spent 50 years of my life doing this,
And how long before the county uses some internet source?
Yeah, I'm sorry I got distracted on that. That's what happens when you get old, okay? But the legals, that's what I meant to tell you the story. So we survived on the great bankruptcies and all. The Covington News survived for about 2 years. So we tried to do that's when we tried to do all these other things while we had the money. And we still have it, and they still have it, but it dropped down from the high down to normal. I mean, and it's nice to have that. It's really nice to have it, but it can't make your paper survive now. You just can't. It's not that much anymore. It's just a normal, run of what happens legally. If that goes away, I think there's going to be a lot of small newspapers that does help them at least break even or make some money are going to be gone. And that can be. I mean, it was always a threat that there's companies out there that want to put it online. In fact, the Georgia Press has it all online. Every newspaper's online. So right now, that's going to eventually go away too, because it's just they're going to get enough people up in the Senate and the House and say in Georgia that have no fear of their community newspaper, because there's no community newspaper that does anything, and they're going to vote how they want to, and they're going to go where the money is and where they're going to go with the source. So I think legals will go away eventually too. And when that does, it's going to hurt. Even papers like the Monroe paper, the Walton County Tribune, the Greene County paper, that's going to hurt them a lot, yes.
Well, and if you had a way of changing anything that you've done, is there anything you'd do different?
No. Daryl, like I said, I saw with the Covington paper, and we were a 3-day-a-week paper. It was, had a good cash flow, had bad management over the years, different times. I think we put out a good newspaper. I mean, we covered things, editorially. We said something. We caused an effect. We caused change. We were the heart of the community. That's what I always believe the newspaper should be, the heart of the community. And would I change anything that I've ever done? No. I really wouldn't, because, like I said, I believe so strongly that a newspaper, again, was the heart and was a living, breathing commodity that, that a community had to have that. And I believe that with my whole heart and soul, and I always did. And I published papers and worked in circulation in North Carolina and Virginia and Colorado and California, Georgia. I've had opportunity, Tennessee. I had opportunities to be a lot of places. I met a lot of people that did a lot of great things. I met vice presidents and sat in owners' boxes at ballparks. There was a time I told people the other day, they said, "Do you miss things?" I said, well, 25 years ago, you could be in your office or somebody else's office with a senator or a congressman or a community leader, and you could almost come to blows theoretically over an issue. Not really, but theoretically. But when you're finished, you shook hands. And the next day you might be out doing something together in the community. It never was personal. Not personal. It was like, hey, this is how our vision of how a community should be. And we can disagree, but we're not going to hate each other because of it. Here, it got to the point here at times that if you disagreed with somebody, once they got in, they didn't think they had to answer to anybody, and they still don't. And they would get their whole families after you. Then they would get on Facebook, and then they would tear you up and your family and your employees, and you do everything else, and it was like that's how it was going to be, and that changed. And again, 25 years ago, somebody call up and say, hey, I didn't like that editorial. I'm going to come down and kick your ass. You say, well, come on down. They weren't going to come down, but now they tell you that you better have a back door you can go out, because they're allowed to come down with a gun. And I think that's part of what it is anymore. There's no respect. Respect is gone.